I work at the Institute with Xingdong, and we work for a guy called Rob Davey. So I'll give you a brief overview of kind of how we're funded. So we're a research institute in the UK, and we're funded on a sort of an example grant, the first of its kind, really, by a research council in the UK, where it's funded across 8 different institutes, and there's 25 groups of scientists. And the idea being that they could get more value for money by funding all these different groups to work together. And the goal of the whole project is to try and effectively reduce the amount of wheat that can be grown in the fields, because modelling forward of how much wheat will be needed for global demand by 2050, we're going to need an extra 60%. So we need to grow much more as possible. And since it takes about 15 or 20 years for current research to make its way into the field, it's imperative to try and start that process. So under DFW, so that's Designing Future Wheat, is now my name of our grant, because they're so long, I'll just say DFW quite a lot. And we produce lots of scientific data. So we have things like field trial experiments where people will take crops and plant them in the field and go, does this work? Does this grow quicker? Does this protect against certain diseases? As well as that, we have different ideas of data sets or genomic sequences and all manner of different scientific output. And on top of that, we have loads of different types of users. So we have breeders that will have different needs from, say, academics or data science or people in industry. So the challenge we've got lots of different types of data, and we've got lots of different types of users, and how we can make that data accessible and usable for everyone. So what we've done is we've come up with a set of software, or a software platform, which we call Grassroots. And the idea about this is it's taking both industry standard software tools, but also our own custom ones that we make, and wraps them all up. And it's all open source. And the idea being that as long as you can speak in JSON, which I guess everyone who's working with Frictionless probably can. So we have a consistent JSON API, so it could be accessed from any other system in the world, and people can use it. Also, the idea that our instances of Grassroots infrastructure can be federated together, the idea you can join 2 together and sort of amalgamate their resources and try and make sure that everything is shared in a fair way. So apologies if everyone already knows this, but the fair data principles are four ideals for how to share data. The first is findability. So the idea being that data is accurately described with metadata, and that people and computers, I should say, should be able to find that data by doing a simple search. We're all used to stuff like Google now, and the ability to just type in a term and pull back the relevant data sets and data that we're interested in. For accessibility, it should be that once people have found the data, they need to know how it can be accessed, whether it needs to be authenticated or authorized. And there's a standard communication protocol where you can get that data with a given identifier each time. In terms of interoperability, it's all very well saying we made our data available. And I've known people that have literally taken a database dump and put it on the web and go, hey, data's openly available, but it needs to be interoperable. Once you get it, you need to be able to use it. So it needs to be able to be integrated with other sets of data. So it should be formally described and well-defined sets of data. The final part is reusability, the idea being that we've done all this work, or you've got some research, or you've got some information you want to share. But if you want to share it, you want to make it as reusable as possible so people can actually get at it. Oops. So in terms of our grassroots infrastructure, we've kind of got this kind of model where we sit everything behind an Apache web server. So Apache is a web server, is kind of the software that allows people to create websites, and or host websites. And it's probably the most commonly used on the web. And we have a set of libraries where we do very common things like how to do networking code, or manage servers or services, or all this kind of code for wrapping up how to access things through JSON APIs and so forth, and how we describe web services and their parameters. And between the two, we write a little module that connects the web server to our Grassroots system. The actual bit that's of interest, the bit that does all the scientific work, are what we call services. So we have things where we've wrapped up existing tools and made them into a Grassroots service, and we've also written our own ones. So we'll take you through a couple of our own ones later on. And there are various things like BLA. So we have a BLA service, which if you're working in sites of bioinformatics, it's basically a search thing where you can type in a genetic sequence and look to see if that exists in any of the sets of data that you've got available. As well as that, we have things like a global search service and lots of work to do with field trials, which I'll describe a bit more. So one of the problems we wanted to address is that typically when you do standard web service interaction, you might go to a certain single web service and do a search on it, and then go to another one and do the same search, and then try and collate results together. So that if you're anything like me, that's prone to error, because I can easily make cutting and pasting errors, or when I collate things together, or I run the services with different sets of parameters so that they're not immediately comparable. And it's just time consuming. So one of the goals we have with Grassroots is that you can federate services together. So we have a Grassroots infrastructure running at our institute, and also one of the partners on DFW is the University of Bristol, and they've got one running there. So we federated the two together. So the idea being, it doesn't matter which system you access, you get to see all the list of services from both combined. And going further than that, it can do things like, if you're running the same service on two different institutions, it can amalgamate the two together. So instead of having blast service listed twice, you're seeing a single blast service with all the listed data sets at both institutions. So from a user's point of view, it's like it's all in one place. So you do your search and get the results back, whereas actually under the hood, there's all this communication going back and forth between the different servers and amalgamating it all together. So I'm going to take you through, we'll go through a few of the projects we've done. So the first is our data board. So like I said, we produce lots and lots of data under DFW, and we're very big on open data and data sharing. And there's also all of the data that we produce is made available under the Toronto Data Agreement. If you hadn't heard of this, it's a really cool agreement where effectively you can share your data before you publish, which is quite a cool thing for scientists. So the idea being that you can then access it and other groups can access it and do their work with it, but you have first right to publish, so they can't publish until the original authors have. So that's a really good a license for doing that. And in terms of the actual software we use to host all that data, we use something called iRods, which if you're not aware of, it's an open source data management software, which is used by, like in research and also in corporate world as well, and in governments. And it has the idea of data virtualization. So the idea being it doesn't matter where the data is stored, you can still access it through a common API within iRods. One of the cool things it has on top of like standard file structures, the ability to attach metadata direct to the objects within an iRods system. So you can actually, for instance, you run an experiment and you want to attach metadata of like the parameters you use to run that experiment, or any additional comments you've got, you can attach those to the output files as metadata. And if you move that data around in the system, it still keeps the metadata attached with it. It also has the ability to be embedded within workflows, and it can be made, you can have authentication on there, so you can have secure collaboration. And it also has the idea of, similarly how I mentioned for Grassroots, we effectively nicked the idea, or paid homage to the idea of federating two iRods instances together so you can share the data between them. So we have this iRods system, but that isn't normally web accessible. So what we did is we took an existing Apache module that was on GitHub and we forked it. And the idea of making a nice website on top of that. So it automatically generates from the iRods listings, or within the iRods file systems, it generates the websites for that, and you can customize that and configure it to make it look nice, which is always an important thing for user sort of experience, but as well make all the metadata available to both display and to make it editable as well. On top of that, we also gave it a full REST web service API, so we tried to make it so that as well as people just come to download our data, they could also embed any of the data we've got into their workflows to pull it off. So in terms of the metadata we store, we have something called the minimal information about a plant phenotyping experiment, which clearly, because that's quite long, they made an acronym, so MIAPI. And that's an idea of a minimal set of data for describing what's been done in an experiment. So for each of the data sets we've got on our system, we have at least this on there. And this is a screenshot of some of the metadata we've got for one of the particular data sets. On top of that, we have things like everything will have titles, descriptions, the license details, what's data on there, and descriptions of what this data set might be about, what type of experiment it was generated from. We have all of this embedded using our own custom Lucene-based text search engine. So Lucene is an open source attempt at trying to do something like Google, I guess would be a way to describe it. So we were lucky enough last year to win an Open Knowledge Tool Fund Award. Part of that was to expose all the data sets as frictionless data packages. So you can see here, for each, these are then automatically generated. So it's not like a user has to go in and fill out a long list of JSON or fill in a form. So it interacts with the iRods system, works out what files and directories are on there and automatically generates the data package files. Of course, I'm in a frictionless data meeting, so I don't probably need to describe what frictionless data is. I'll skip that one. But so each of the projects within that, each of the packages that we create, they all have automatically generated the license details, the names, the descriptions, the authors, the title of the project, and also a unique identifier. And all of these, it's all done, like I said, automatically. So it's all taken from the metadata values that are stored within the iRod system. And it's all completely configurable because we can't go to people and say, hey, we've got this great system for generating frictionless data packages, but you have to use these iRod's metadata keys to do it. That wouldn't work. So that's all configurable. So you can just write a little properties file saying, okay, take these metadata values from iRods and convert them into these frictionless data values. And it can amalgamate values together. So, and also it can deal with tabular data resources as well. So we have the idea for a similar thing that you can specify for particular CSV files or similar. These are the columns and these are the data types. Again, it takes those from the iRods and puts those into tabular data resources within the frictionless data packages. So that's all cool stuff. So we did that and we love frictionless data. So we thought, so I'm going to talk about field trials now, and don't be surprised if frictionless data comes up in this as well. So for field trials, they're typically where breeders or academics will have an idea of a particular problem they're trying to solve, in particular how to increase the yield of a crop, for instance. And they'll go and plant different species within the field and apply different treatments with fertilizers or whatever, and then measure maybe how quickly they grow or how high they grow and so forth. So we create a system for managing all this data. And again, we want to make sure that all the data is compliant with the fair sharing principles. So we have the idea of a Google Maps based approach of you can zoom in across the world and see what experiments have been done, as well as having a more standard text-based search form. And each of these lead you to the studies that are all on the system. So not just with field trials, but with everything we do, all of the data we do is openly available. So the accessibility part of their data is just a given for all the work we do. And all of the field trials and studies have a unique identifier, so they can be accessed through standard web technologies as well. Now, in terms of interoperability, we initially started with something called BRAPI, which is a community-driven open source standard for plant breeding databases of describing how plants were breeded together. So we had that as part of our interoperability initially. And we have lots of sort of user-facing features, like the idea that it can, the people planting these experiments have very, very accurate GPS enabled drones, and on the tractors that actually plant the materials, they've got very accurate GPS coordinates. So we can store that so people can zoom in on the field and go to an actual plot. They can walk around the field in real time and it will update on their device. So they can see which plot they're in, so they know they can look up what crop was planted there and so forth. So in terms of reusability, we have various different sets of data installed. We have generic terms such as the length or width of a plot, so a plot being where one particular type of crop was sown, the date it was sown, and any particular comments and any treatments that were applied and so forth. And again, you can add sort of things like image files or anything like that to try and make it as much information capture as possible. All of these are stored with standard ontological terms wherever possible. And we also store phenotypes. So phenotypes is basically a measurement, as an easy way to describe it. So it might be, for instance, the height of the plant or how long it took to grow or anything like that. So typically they involve things like a trait, as in you're measuring the height. The method might be what you're using to measure it with. And the units could be, whether it be meters or centimeters or so forth, along with the actual value and the date that it was done. So all of these, again, as I mentioned before, everything's ontologized or semantically written up, and we try and use the crop ontology wherever possible. So I mentioned that we used the breeding API BRAPI, and we have also our Grassroots APIs. And that's all well and good for exposing data, but a lot of the people that we work with aren't necessarily programmers or even necessarily comfortable scripting. I remember teaching at a workshop, and it was a real eye-opener for me. So for breeders and academics and people that know way more about biology than I could ever do, and their level of comfort is they wanted to go basically if Excel is kind of where they wanted to be and that kind of thing. So the idea of having all these APIs for them just wasn't appropriate. So we thought, well, how can we get around this? And the answer we came to was, let's use frictionless data again. So we went through the different types of data we've got in our system. So we have studies, and they're parts of field trials that are part of programs. So all of these things, we created schemas for them and put those on the web. And another partner institution on the DFW grant is Rothamsted Research, and there's a guy there called by the name of Rich Dossler, who he's big into frictionless data as well. He does frictionless data carpentry lessons. He's now starting up, and they've got similar kind of experiments, but much longer term. That could be like 10, 15, 20-year experiments. And again, he's looking to use frictionless data for that. So we're collaborating on that. So for each, again, all of this is automatically generated. It's not anything that a user has to create. It's all generated from within the field trial system. So we create these data packages that have various resources in them, and they tend to be the study, the program, and then like a tabular data resource, which is the actual equivalent spreadsheet of all the plots and stuff. So as I mentioned before, we have standard attributes like length of the plot, width, position in the field, and so forth. And also each study will be different. So each study will have different treatments applied to it, whether it be different fertilizers or so forth. And they'll also be measuring different things. So that's automatically generated as well from the field trial system. It knows for this particular study, these are the treatments that are applied, these are the things that are measured. So let's add those to the tabular data resource. And you can see, it might not be immediately easy to see there, but we've got various traits that were measured for a particular plot within the field there. So we got these into the data package, and that was great. But the problem that people still had at the other end was, well, how do we actually get stuff out of the data packages? Again, without scripts. So another thing we came up with is this idea of, and I've got to think of a smart and nicer name for it, but the Grassroots Frictionless Data Tool or whatever. There's got to be a better name. So any ideas are all welcome. But the idea being that it will, a tool that's cross-platform, so that people can point at a frictionless data package that they've downloaded, and it will go away and make it and convert it into some format that they might find more easily digestible. So currently we have the idea that general data resources can be changed into Markdown or to HTML, and for tabular data resources we're going to CSV. And the point, another thing about this is not wheat specific. There's nothing in the code that says if not wheat, exit or anything like that. It's completely generic. So the idea being, I've got a little snippet of one of the data packages that we've done for one of the field trials here, and you can, it's got the general data package description along, and then it starts a list of resources. I'll just focus on the first one. So the tool will go through and go for each resource and look for whatever's in the profile, and then go over onto the web and download that profile. And then it uses that. So here's an example of some of that profile, and it will then use that to generate the actual report, or whether it be the HTML or the Markdown. So we've got here the snippet of this is that snippet in HTML. So it's generated. It's gone through all the keys from the profile and gone, okay, these are the keys, mark them up. Oh, the ones with the stars, it's gone, oh, these are the required properties, so put a star on to make that clear and so forth. So that's kind of what we've done with that. This is the initial version of it. So any feedback, good, bad, indifferent, ranting, is more than welcome. And any ideas, again, more than welcome. And I think I'm now going to pass you over to my colleague, Xingdong.
Sure. So another part of the tool fund we have is related to CCAN. We have a wheat CCAN for the Designing Future Wheat project. So this project involves multiple institutes and universities, and it generates a lot of research outcomes. Most of them are papers. We use this CCAN tool. It's a CCAN. I guess most of the guys here would know CCAN is an open source data website repository. We use this CCAN to store all the publications across the institutes. Next page, please. So,
oh, sorry.
Part of the tool fund was to expose the CCAN data as frictionless data package. Because of the time constraint, we didn't really want to do a full extension. So what we did was a simple Django app using Python. By utilizing the REST API of the CCAN, as well as already made that frictionless data package mapper that Lily sent me kindly. We were able to easily convert any of the CCAN data sets into frictionless data packages. Also, the Django app can push it back to the CCAN, the actual file, as one of the downloads, one of the resources. So if any of the resources in there is an Excel file or CSV file, the frictionless data package will also capture that and getting all the headers, so make it compliant to the tabular data package schema. So this Django app is really portable, so it can work with any CK installations. Just point the URL to that. Next page, please. So yeah, well, it doesn't look nice, so it's just for REST API. And next. Yeah, this shows from the tool, then it generates a data package.json and pushes it back into the CCAN site. CCAN use a key authentication, so only the person has write access can push the data back into that. Okay, next please. I think that's the last one. Oh, is that the last next page? Yeah, further work. So probably one of the things is to Dockerize the CCAN Django web app. That's mainly what I'm going to focus on next. That's probably Simon, you can chip in on the other parts of the frictionless data you were going to.
Yeah, I mean, as a general principle, we love frictionless data. So it's basically trying to increase use of that. So we're looking to expand what keys and values we add to like describing the data sets, but also just wherever we can, we're going to try and shove frictionless data as a sort of output thing from our services. Yeah, so like I mentioned with Richard, we're looking at another set of work to take this and expose frictionless data for both single. So a lot of the stuff we do is for single year experiments, and he focuses a lot more on longer term ones, as I said, like 10, 15 year ones. So we're going to collaborate more on trying to expose all of those as frictionless data and effectively come out with a set of common profiles that will suit both and expose all our weak data that way. Lots of people that we worked with, lots of names. So the OM Institute we work with, and some of the partner institutions. And you can tell us from the CSV conf, but I should say that's a big thank you to the frictionless data people, to the Open Knowledge Foundation for letting us giving us the money for the award in the first place so we could get started with this, and for all the help you guys have been. Great, honestly. And yeah, that's that.